The blind date changed into empty, until a little woman walked in and stated, "My mommy's sorry, she's overdue." It changed into one of these late afternoons, wherein the city lighting fixtures started to wake, shimmering through the tall glass home windows of Bellerose, an upscale eating place nestled within the coronary heart of downtown. The tables had been full of murmurs of laughter, clinks of silverware, and the low hum of jazz floating from hidden audio system. At a nook table, elegantly set for two, sat Graham Hale. He changed into the kind of man who wore time like a uniform. Crisp white shirt, tailor-made gray tie, cuffs aligned flawlessly above his wristwatch, a timepiece that price greater than the general public's monthly rent. But it wasn't about the money. It turned into approximately precision, manipulate, discipline. He sat nevertheless, eyes flickering another time to the display of his smartphone. No new messages. He pressed his lips into a thin line, then grew to become his wrist and glanced at the dial of his watch. 17 minutes beyond the hour. His jaw flexed. He hated lateness, no longer due to inconvenience, but as it reminded him of something else. A sense of being disregarded, forgotten. A baby waiting on a doorstep that never opened. He'd driven his chair lower back, the legs sliding easily in opposition to the marble ground. The maitre saw him begin to rise and approached, but Graham lifted a hand lightly. Not now. Then it took place. A small figure darted between the legs of a waiter and a passing couple. A blur of blonde curls, purple shoes, and determined little steps. She ran immediately towards him, uninvited, uninhibited. She clutched at his pant leg with tiny arms and looked up, cheeks flushed from the run, blue eyes huge with urgency. "My mommy's sorry, she's past due," the little lady stated, barely breathless, as if this apology had been rehearsed and intended the arena to deliver. Graham froze for the first time in a completely long whilst. He did now not recognize what to say. The eating place blurred for a second. All the precision in his international, the ticking watch, the measured tone of jazz, the rhythm of his based lifestyles paused. He seemed down at her. She became maybe 3, a wisp of a toddler carrying a denim jumper over a yellow tea blouse, one sock barely slouched, the opposite perfectly in region. A tiny silver barrette held a strand of hair to the facet, but the relaxation became a tousled halo. And those eyes, honest, expectant. His lips parted. "What?" he said. The girl repeated, less assailable now, as though she feared he had now not heard her really. "Mommy stated she's clearly, certainly sorry." She tugged again at his pant leg and gestured to the empty chair throughout from him. "That's for her, right?" Graham slowly diminished himself again into the seat, now not taking his eyes off her. Something interior him, something vintage and quietly wounded, stirred. He had been the boy once, sitting on a cold step with a backpack waiting, telling himself memories about why someone became past due, why they forgot. He had built an empire to never sense that manner again. And now this small girl, this baby with obese palms and extreme eyes, had taken him proper again to that doorstep. Besides, she had come to supply the message he never got. A voice called out from behind. "Maisie, Maisie, honey." A lady moved quickly into view, breath catching, heels clicking erratically. "I advised you to attend by the door." Graham appeared up. There she changed into blonde hair escaping a low bun, face flushed with embarrassment. She wore an easy army dress and carried a tote bag that regarded a ways too heavy for one shoulder. Her eyes met his, and for a second she hesitated. "I'm so sorry," she stated, her voice heat however rushed, wrapping her hands protectively round the child. She insisted on finding you." The little lady beamed. "I did it, Mommy. I informed him." The woman laughed softly, then looked at Graham once more. "Laya Monroe," she stated, extending a hand. He shook it instinctively. Her grip became firm, honest, no pretenses, no gloss. Graham Hale. A flicker of something crossed her face. She had heard the call most of the people had, However, she did not point out it. As an alternative, she grew to become to her daughter. "Maisie, can you express regret for running off?" Maisie nodded dutifully. "Sorry, Mr. Graham." Graham blinked. "It's Kay," he said nearly too quietly. The matra arrived, unsure whether to interfere or serve. Graham lifted a hand barely. They were staying. As the two sat down, Graham observed the manner Laya smoothed Maisie's hair earlier than putting her lightly on a booster seat. Every motion became calm, full of care. She adjusted her personal chair with a quiet apology and exhaled deeply, simply once. For the primary time in a long term, Graham Hale didn't thoughts the time, and he sincerely wasn't considering leaving anymore. Laya Monroe sat throughout from him, still catching her breath, strands of golden hair slipping from the unfastened bun at the nape of her neck. The sleeves of her dress were barely creased, and her cheeks still held a faint flush from dashing. "I'm sorry," she said again, this time softer. Searching without delay into Graham's eyes, there was a man who collapsed near the subway. "I needed to help." Her voice held no performance, no dramatics, just the simple weight of a truth she did not seem to assume wished defending. Graham stared at her, the usual script in his thoughts failing to cue. He had predicted excuses. He had expected something about site visitors, a forgotten object, a call from work. He had no longer predicted this. She reached right down to modify Maisie's sandal, her hand lingering for a second on her daughter's ankle, then straightened up. Her dress turned into plain navy blue with a diminished hem. No jewelry, now not even an eye. However, there was something inside the manner she carried herself. Regular, present. Graham tilted his head, barely concerning her. "The majority don't stop." Laya shrugged lightly. "Most people anticipate a person else will." There it turned into again, that quiet conviction. He didn't realize what amazed him extra, the reality that she had stopped for a stranger, or the manner she spoke approximately. It find it irresistible turned into the most everyday thing in the global. "It took longer than I concept," she brought. "The ambulance become overdue." "And?" "Nicely," Maisie insisted we nevertheless come. "I'm happy you probably did," Graham said, almost before realizing he had stated it. Maisie giggled and waved at a passing waiter. "Mommy makes boo-boo's experience better." Laya smiled at her daughter, then turned her attention lower back to Graham. "I'm hoping you weren't waiting too long." He hesitated. 17 minutes. Her smile faltered for a break-up second. "That's pretty long." Graham nodded, but then surprised even himself by including, "It's high quality." Something about the sincerity in her apology, now not protecting, no longer overdone, softened the tension he continually held around lateness. In his international, every 2D turned into a greenback. Every postpone became a crack inside the device. However, this female had selected a stranger's lifestyles over punctuality. That unsettled something deep in him. He glanced toward the door where the matre had to start with hovered in advance, now out of sight. He ought to have walked away. By means of all logic, he should have. But common sense wasn't jogging the display anymore. Now, not this night. "You said he collapsed?" Graham requested. Laya nodded. "I didn't recognize what took place. He just crumpled. Human beings kept on foot round him. Some stared, but nobody stopped. So that you did." "I didn't suppose twice," she said surely. "Maisie held my bag whilst I stayed with him until someone known as 911. Graham studied her. The warmth in her eyes contrasted so sharply with the cool efficiency he changed into used to. The people in his international moved speedy, talked fast, shook palms with masks on. However, right here became a person who didn't even very own a mask to wear. Maisie reached throughout the desk and grabbed a sugar packet, fidgeting with it earlier than Laya lightly took it from her. "Sorry," she stated. "We're normally greater prepared." Graham provided an unprecedented smile. "It's Kay." He observed the way Laya's shoulders relaxed barely, like she had predicted this dinner to be a tribulation. And perhaps it still would be, However, for now, the tone had shifted. "Thanks for still coming," he brought, his voice decrease. Laya looked at him curious. "Did you think I wouldn't? I notion you may determine it wasn't really worth it." She taken into consideration that. "If I didn't assume it became well worth it, I wouldn't have come at all." Graham leaned lower back barely, something unusual stirring in his chest. Admiration, maybe, or something quieter, deeper, something he hadn't allowed in for a long time. "I needed to assist." That sentence repeated itself in his mind. Human beings have been overdue for egocentric motives. Humans overlooked things because they forgot, due to the fact they didn't care. However, she were past due because she selected someone else over herself. He did no longer need to depart anymore, no longer even near. The waiter lowered back with a high chair, and Maisie climbed into it with the self-assurance of a person who had dined inside the world's best institutions, or at least believed she had. She swung her little legs thankfully and grabbed the nook of the menu, despite the fact that she couldn't read a word of it. Graham watched her with quiet entertainment, then became to Laya. "Is grilled cheese okay?" Before she could answer, Maisie piped up, "I like grilled everything." Laya laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made Graham's shoulders decrease an inch. "She's not exaggerating," she stated. "If it has cheese and grill marks, we're in." Graham gave a small nod to the waiter. "3 orders, then." "1 grilled cheese, 1 seared salmon, and a pasta without a herbs or green matters," he said, glancing at Maisie, who grinned in approval. "You've completed this earlier then," Laya stated, her brows raised. He smirked. "Now, not exactly, however I discovered Speedy." The conversation began with gradual, well-mannered exchanges, in which they lived, what they did, the type of small communicate that generally felt forced. But something about this evening made it unique. Perhaps it was the way Maisie sometimes chimed in with extensive-eyed remarks, approximately such things as clouds formed like elephants. Or maybe it became the way Laya leaned forward when she listened, certainly interested in what Graham had to say. For the primary time in years, he wasn't going for walks through a tick list of purple flags or compatibility metrics in his thoughts. He was simply present. Then, mid-sentence, it passed off. Maisie reached for her juice with a little too much enthusiasm, and the glass tipped sideways, spilling bloodless water instantly into Laya's lap. Laya gasped softly and, instinctively driven, returned her chair. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she began, fumbling for a napkin. But Graham turned into already moving. With one easy motion, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a superbly folded material handkerchief. He leaned over, cautiously, dabbing on the cloth of her dress, simply above the knee. Now not invasive, no longer hurried, just mild, efficient, unique. Laya stilled for a beat. Neither of them moved. His hand paused mid-movement. She checked out him, truly checked out him, and something shifted. The air round them grew softer, quieter, as though the restaurant, with all its smooth music and flickering candles, had diminished into the historical past. Their eyes met. "You're not what I anticipated," she said quietly, a chunk breathless. Graham checked out her, then slowly withdrew his hand, folding the material back with care. "Neither are you." She smiled, but it held something deeper, a mixture of gratitude, wonder, and perhaps even vulnerability. "Most guys don't carry handkerchiefs anymore," she introduced. "I'm now not maximum men," he spoke back. "That lots," she said, glancing down at the now damp hem of her get-dressed. "Maybe very clean." Maisie, oblivious to the emotional modern-day passing among them, resumed fortunately munching on a breadstick. Laya became to her daughter, brushing a crumb off her chin, then more softly to Graham. "Thank you." That changed into kind. "It wasn't something," he said, although it definitely were. It were a second where something unstated handed between two people from very specific worlds, a connection made now not from grand gestures or perfectly timed strains, but from a normal act of thoughtfulness. For the relaxation of the meal, the communication flowed more without difficulty. Laya spoke about the bookstore she labored at for the duration of the day, the odor of antique paper, how Maisie would curl up within the analyzing corner while she stacked cabinets. Graham shared little anecdotes from the tech world, stories generally reserved for boardrooms or silent dinners with traders. However, by some means he observed himself wanting her to recognize. Maisie on occasion interrupted with observations about dogs she had visible or tales from preschool. On every occasion she spoke, Graham leaned in, certainly listening. The bloodless metal ecosystem of Belarus, all glass, silver, and whispered etiquette, slowly transformed around them. It now not felt like a first date, arranged through chance. It felt like the beginning of some thing heat. The night breeze had picked up by the time they stepped out of the eating place. The metropolis lighting glowed softly above, pondered in passing vehicle windows and the wet sheen of the pavement. Graham reached into his coat pocket, adjusting his keys. "I'll drive you home," he supplied, nodding towards the glossy black vehicle parked simply throughout the street. "It's late, and the town's now not exactly charming at night." Laya gave a mild chuckle, transferring Maisie to her different hip. "Thank you, but we take the bus." Graham blinked. "The bus?" "Maisie loves it," she stated with a grin, brushing a curl from her daughter's brow. She waves at anybody she sees via the window. "It's her night tradition," Maisie piped up, surely energized despite the hour. "And Mommy lets me sit by using the window if nobody else wishes it." Graham hesitated. He turned into used to providing things, rides, improvements, solutions, and he turned into even more used to human beings accepting them fast. Every so often before he completed the sentence, "but no longer Laya." Her voice held no pleasure, no undertaking, only a quiet guarantee that their manner of having domestic become enough. They commenced walking together toward the close by bus forestall, Graham falling into step beside them. The sidewalk became cracked in locations, and Maisie pointed out a flower developing through a gap. Laya knelt beside her to respect it. Love it became a portrait in a gallery. "Do you stay some distance?" Graham asked after a pause. "Not actually. 15 mins by bus. We lease a small area close to the library." Graham seemed over. "Do you work there?" "On the library?" "No," she said. "I work element time on the bookstore throughout the road from it. It's quiet, and they permit me carry Maisie sometimes. I additionally wait tables some nights per week." He glanced at her, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't explaining herself. She became just sharing. The weight of that struck him greater than he expected. "You're busy," he said. "I try and be," she replied. "Bills don't pay themselves, and Maisie thinks meals magically seems, so I attempt to hold the illusion alive." Graham chuckled. He wasn't certain if it became her honesty or the way she said it with such ease, but something approximately her made the world feel much less transactional. He hesitated. "Do you ever reflect on consideration on doing something else?" "Positive," she spoke back. "Don't all of us? However proper now, this is where I'm. And truly it's not awful. I get to examine to my daughter, work with books, and meet strangers who every now and then end up buddies." There has been no hint of bitterness in her voice, no hint of if simplest, just presence. "You're not stricken?" he asked. "By how difficult it is?" Laya checked out him, then simply regarded. "Lifestyles is difficult for absolutely everyone in one-of-a-kind approaches. Graham, I simply try to make sure it doesn't make me hard and go back." They stopped on the bus prevent. A breeze stirred the hem of her get-dressed. She adjusted Maisie's jacket and added quietly, "Kindness is what I need, Maisie, to recollect. Now, not how fancy our dinner turned into." The phrases hit him like a quiet wave, tender but unstoppable. He had grown up questioning achievement was armor. The extra of it you wore, the much less the world ought to harm you. However, in front of him stood a woman without a armor in any respect. No wealth, no connections, no backup plan, just love and quiet resolve. And suddenly all his polished routines and bulletproof strategies felt small. He looked at her, then at Maisie, now buzzing to herself even as swinging her feet. And for the first time in years, Graham Hale, tech magnate, manipulate freak, perfectionist, didn't sense superior. He felt humbled. There were no extra reservations, no formal dinners or name cards on crisp white linens. From that night time on, their conferences had been simple, unplanned. However, one way or the other they mattered more. They met on park benches surrounded by duck ponds and ice cream vans. Once in a while it became a corner table inside the comfy cafe 2 blocks from Laya's condo, wherein Maisie would color on napkins, even as Laya and Graham sipped lukewarm espresso. Other times it turned into the quiet lower back aisle of the used bookstore where Laya worked, the one that usually smelled like antique pages and cinnamon tea. There were no scripts to comply with, no performances, just conversations and silences that didn't need to be stuffed. One Saturday morning, Graham confirmed up at the bookstore with a paper bag below his arm. "For Maisie," he said, offering it to Laya. She opened it carefully, eyes widening as she pulled out a group of traditional fairy memories, hardcovers, illustrated, some with gilded edges. Not new, but properly loved, cautiously selected. "She's been asking approximately Cinderella," he stated. "And I thought maybe Snow White should stability it out." Laya smiled and blinked fast. "That's notably type. She mentioned she likes dragons," he added nearly shyly. "There's one in right here somewhere." Maisie squealed when she saw the books. "Are they mine for all time?" "Sure," Graham spoke back. "However, you have to promise to proportion them along with your mommy." "I can," Maisie stated solemnly, hugging the stack to her chest. Later that afternoon, they sat collectively in the park. Graham had by no means studied out loud to anybody earlier then, but there he became, cross-legged on the grass, retaining an open e-book, whilst Maisie leaned in opposition to his aspect, her fingers tracing the pics. He stumbled over a voice for the fairy godmother, and Maisie burst into laughter. "You sound like a robot." "I'm a robotic," he deadpanned. "Fairy protocol activated." Laya watched from a short distance, sipping tea from a paper cup, her smile smooth and steady as the sun started to lower. Graham helped Maisie into her footwear. She'd kicked them off at some stage in a faux tea birthday party with imaginary woodland animals. He didn't say something as he located them under a tree, dusted them off, and located them lower back via her feet. Left to the left, proper to the right, neatly aligned. Laya saw the gesture. She stated not anything then, but her chest ached inside the excellent manner. Later that week, she requested him, "Why do you do all this?" Graham shrugged. "You're the handiest humans I sit up for seeing." That night time, as Laya positioned Maisie to bed, she found herself whispering, "We're now not simply visitors in his global, are we?" Maisie mumbled, half asleep, "He's our all-the-time friend." And by some means that felt more true than something. They stopped calling it dating. It didn't need a label. It became lunch on curbs, silly faces throughout errands, shared laughter over burnt toast, and quiet moments in which Graham checked out them like he'd eventually come home. One rainy morning, a small institution accrued on the nearby library for a network studying occasion. Laya and Maisie arrived early, and the librarian greeted them with a heat smile. "There's something you must see," she stated, gesturing toward a new plaque above the youngster's nook. Laya stepped nearer. The gold letters were etched surely, however they held a lot. Donated with gratitude by means of a pal for the female who makes time for strangers, and the girl who makes me smile. L&M, studying corner. Her hand flew to her mouth. Maisie tugged at her coat. "Mommy, that's us." Laya blinked back tears. "Yes, infant. That's us." She grew to become and stuck sight of Graham's status at the some distance end of the library, looking them with a tender, almost bashful expression. He said not anything. He didn't need to. The gesture was louder than any assertion. He wasn't just showing up anymore. He changed into staying. It befell on a Wednesday morning. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops when Laya's telephone buzzed with 3 unread messages, then 5, then 12. Her palms trembled as she opened the primary link. There it became, ambitious, unmissable, plastered across a gossip web page's homepage. Tech giant, dating waitress with youngster, secret romance or charity case. The pictures had been grainy, however unmistakable. Graham crouching beside Maisie at the bookshop, Laya giggling as they crossed the road, her hand gently on his arm. A non-public second turned public without permission. She felt her belly drop. Scrolling in addition, she examined the speculative captions. Some praised Graham's humanitarian heart. Others accused him of the usage of the flounders, his wealth, his power, his charitable gestures. Her hand flew to her mouth. Maisie tugged at her coat. "Mommy, that's us." Laya blinked lower back tears. "Sure, child, that's us." She became and stuck sight of Graham standing at the some distance quit of the library, looking them with a soft, almost bashful expression. He stated not anything. He didn't need to. The gesture changed into louder than any declaration. He wasn't just showing up anymore. He was staying. It passed off on a Wednesday morning. The solar hadn't even cleared the rooftops, whilst Laya's telephone buzzed with 3 unread messages, then 5, then 12. Her fingers trembled as she opened the primary hyperlink. There it was, bold, unmissable, plastered throughout a gossip website's homepage. Tech giant, courting waitress with child, mystery romance or charity case. The images have been grainy, however unmistakable. Graham crouching beside Maisie on the bookstore, Laya giggling as they crossed the street, her hand gently on his arm. A private second grew to become public without permission. She felt her belly drop. Scrolling further, she examined the speculative captions. Some praised Graham's humanitarian heart. Others accused him of the use of the flounders, his wealth, his strength, his charitable gestures. Her hand flew to her mouth. Maisie tugged at her coat. "Mommy, that's us." Laya blinked again, tears. "Sure, child, that's us." Laya became and caught sight of Graham standing at the some distance give up of the library, looking them with a gentle, nearly bashful expression. He stated nothing. He didn't need to. The gesture became louder than any declaration. He wasn't simply showing up anymore. He was staying. It took place on a Wednesday morning. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops, whilst Laya's cell phone buzzed with 3 unread messages, then 5, then 12. Her palms trembled as she opened the primary link. There it became, bold, unmissable, plastered throughout a gossip website's homepage. Tech massive, courting waitress with youngster, mystery romance or charity case. The photos were grainy, however unmistakable. Graham crouching beside Maisie on the bookstore, Laya giggling as they crossed the road, her hand lightly on his arm. A private moment grew to become public without permission. She felt her belly drop. Scrolling similarly, she examined the speculative captions. Some praised Graham's humanitarian coronary heart. Others accused him of the usage of the flounders, his wealth, his electricity, his charitable gestures. Her hand flew to her mouth. Maisie tugged at her coat. "Mommy, that's us." Laya blinked lower back tears. "Sure, child, that's us." She became and stuck sight of Graham standing on the far end of the library, watching them with a smooth, almost bashful expression. He said nothing. He didn't want to. The gesture changed into louder than any assertion. He wasn't just displaying up anymore. He became staying. Laya felt the load of the world, heavy and suffocating, but she wasn't equipped to break simply but. She stepped toward the cabinets, Maisie at her aspect, her tiny arms clutching her mother's hand. "Mommy," Maisie stated quietly, her eyes scanning the plaque once more, her innocence untouched by means of the harsh international of grown-up complexities. "Are we absolutely like that? Do humans think we're his?" Laya smiled at her daughter's purity. "No, sweetheart. We're just us, and that's all that topics. A part of her wanted to shrink back, to protect Maisie from all of it. But the different part, the element that had already permit Graham into their lives, knew that the direction in advance wouldn't be about walking away. It might be approximately standing tall, collectively. That night, because the solar dipped lower in the sky, Laya located herself sitting by way of the window of their small rental. The quiet hum of the city echoed underneath, and Maisie turned into curled up with one in every of her new books, her little legs tucked under her. Laya's telephone buzzed at the desk, a message from Graham. "Can we talk?" Laya's heart skipped a beat. She'd been awaiting this second, but she wasn't sure if she'd become equipped for it. The anxiety in her chest felt tight, her thoughts racing with all of the matters she wanted to say, the emotions she wanted to bring. But for now, she honestly replied, "While you're geared up." Minutes passed earlier than a knock echoed at the door. Graham stood there, carrying the same clothes he had on in advance. No in shape, no wealth, just a guy with tired eyes and a vulnerability she hadn't seen in him earlier then. He looked at her, a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze, but it became gone as quickly as it appeared. He took a breakthrough, the burden of the world seeming to relaxation on his shoulders. "I didn't mean for things to get complex, Laya," he stated softly. "I by no means notion the sector could make it this manner. However, I'm no longer leaving. I understand the headlines say something they are saying, but they don't recognize me. They don't recognize us." Laya opened her mouth, however words didn't come. She swallowed tough, looking at him with all of the thoughts she had bottled up for days. "I'm not asking you to restoration things. However, I can't be a part of a tale people write approximately us. I'm simply looking to defend Maisie. We've been quality without all of this noise." Graham nodded, understanding. "I recognize. But you ought to realize, I'm no longer leaving. I won't allow them to write our tale for us." The phrases hit her like a wave. They were easy, direct, and real. For a moment, Laya saw him now, not because the tech magnate, no longer as the man the arena assumed he turned into, however as a person who truly cared. For her, for Maisie. "I've been preventing so many matters," Laya whispered, her voice cracking slightly, "and that I don't want to combat you too." Graham reached out, his hand hovering over hers. "You don't should fight me. I'm not going anywhere." The days that accompanied felt like a shift inside the air. Things didn't all at once grow to be less difficult, but they have become clearer. Graham didn't leave. He stayed, in small methods and huge ones. All of them started to regulate to their new normal, which changed into less about titles and greater about the picks they made each day. The dinners inside the cafe became recurring. The spontaneous journeys to the book place, the park, and the quiet moments of laughter within the kitchen, all have become theirs. It became a Sunday morning, touched with gold. The air changed into crisp, the type that hinted at fall just round the edges. Leaves whispered within the breeze as they fluttered down to the sidewalk. The metropolis changed into quiet, resting between weekday rushes and afternoon errands. And there they had been, the three of them, taking walks facet through side down a tree-lined route closer to the park. Graham held a small paper bag in a single hand, packed with cinnamon rolls from a Nook bakery. Laya carried a travel mug of tea, her loose hand tucked loosely into her jacket pocket. Maisie skipped beforehand, chalk clutched tightly in her fingers, her curls bouncing with every step. There was no need for communication. The silence became the best type, the type that handiest settles in while humans feel secure. At the entrance to the park, Maisie paused and dropped to the ground beside the concrete walkway. She knelt on both knees, pulled out her chalk, and commenced to attract. Laya and Graham watched as colors bloomed beneath her palms, blue, red, yellow, and inexperienced. The shapes had been simple, however clean. 3 stick figures stood in a row, one tall, one medium, one tiny. With a swirl of blonde chalk for hair above them, in crooked slanted letters, she scrawled, My circle of relatives. Graham stared at it. Something in his chest accelerated slowly, painfully, beautifully. Laya looked at him, her eyes shining inside the morning light. She didn't say whatever. She didn't ought to. Graham stepped closer to her. He took the mug from her hands and set it gently on the nearby bench. Then he grew to become, took a breath, and dropped to one knee at the solar-warmed pavement beside the drawing. There has been no ring-field, no huge speech, simply his eyes assembly hers, regular and clear. "Can I stay?" he said softly. "For each late moment of your lifestyles?" Laya's breath stuck. Maisie regarded up, a chalk smear on her cheek. "Does that suggest you stay with us now?" Graham smiled at her, then became returned to Laya. "Handiest if your mommy says yes." Laya progressed, bent down and cupped his face in both hands. "You already stayed through the worst," she whispered. "Of course you could stay for the relaxation." She kissed his brow, and he closed his eyes as if sealing the instant into memory. Maisie clapped her chalk-stained hands. "Yay! Can we have pancakes each Saturday now?" Graham laughed. "Deal, however most effective in case you assist turn them." "I am superb at flipping," Maisie declared with utmost self-belief. Laya stood and presented Graham her hand. He took it, status with her, brushing dirt from his jeans. Together they turned back down the course. Laya on one aspect, Graham on the alternative, Maisie among them. They walked slowly. 3 shadows stretched throughout the pavement, 3 hands held tight, 3 hearts unique but whole, stitched collectively not by means of blood, but by means of preference. They didn't communicate about what got here next, approximately titles or weddings or what the sector would possibly say. They didn't need to, due to the fact every now and then the clearest love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fancy declarations. Now and again it genuinely indicates up, and it stays.